Welcome to the Occult Unmasked. I'm John Razimus. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about a book I just read. It's called The Black Arts by Richard Cavendish. And this is Mr. Cavendish's most successful book. And I found this at the library at a book sale. And it was about $1.50. Pretty good deal. It has no library thing in it, so it was a donation to the library, and they didn't want to put it on the shelves. They just immediately resold it. So you can get some interesting books at the library. Now this book, it has about 350 pages, and I did read a good 90% of it. I skipped a few chapters. Well, I skipped the astrology chapter after I started reading a couple pages of it. I'm not a big fan of astrology. I just skipped it. Astrology, astrological magic is the belief that if you do something on this month, it'll be infused with the power of the moon or the power of Jupiter. And I don't believe in that stuff, so I don't find it interesting. I don't find it entertaining. But there was a lot of information in this book. I'm going to end up marking down half of a score point, half of a skull, for every time this book blatantly tries to force their opinion down the reader's throat. They try to come off as just someone explaining what occultists believe objectively, and then they become non-objective when they try to force some occult belief down your throat. And I'll give you some examples. On page 32, this is the first red flag that I have to mark it down half of a point. It says here, I guess the sentence starts on page 31. He's talking about Eliphas Levi, who's a famous occultist. It's saying his later books are less interesting, including The History of Magic, 1860, and The Key of the Mysteries, 1861, which he himself translated into English when he was reincarnated as Aleister Crowley. Now, they're stating that like it's a fact. And then later in the book, he mentions, Crowley believed he was the reincarnation of Eliphas Levi. But just because he believed he was the reincarnation of a famous occultist, it doesn't mean he is. It's not a fact. So he just subtly slips that in there as if it's a fact. There is no fact that anyone was reincarnated into anyone. It doesn't matter if someone died and the next year someone was born with their traits. It doesn't matter. There's no proof reincarnation even exists. Now, I understand it's a belief of many different religious systems, but I personally do not believe in reincarnation, and to state it as a fact, I thought was laughable. There were a lot of interesting chapters in this book. I guess the first interesting fact I came across was on page 15. So I did a little bit of research on the internet, and it's definitely an interesting factoid. Right here, it's talking about Pope Urban VIII. And it says, their efforts were evidently successful, this is page 15, as Urban VIII did not die until 1644. Now, he's talking about Pope Urban VIII gaining the help of a sorcerer named Tommaso Campanella. Now, Tommaso Campanella is a famous astrologer who did live during the time of Pope Urban VIII. I did a little research on the internet, and on Tommaso Campanella's Wikipedia page, it does talk about how Pope Urban VIII was his friend and freed him from jail, freed him from prison. So there was a relationship between Pope Urban VIII and Tommaso Campanella. That much is a fact. But this book goes a little bit deeper. Now, as I said before, this book has a lot of lies in it. It has a lot of garbage. So you have to take everything in this book with a grain of salt, which is too bad because I believe this particular fact happens to be true, but I have to do a little more research to be sure of that. But basically, it's telling of a ceremony that took place. Pope Urban VIII asked Tommaso Campanella, the sorcerer, astrologer. Now, he wasn't just a regular astrologer. When people think of astrologers, when I think of astrologers, I think of someone who is a fortune teller, who looks at the stars and goes, yes, you will have a successful year in love or business this year, blah, blah, blah. That's what I think of when I think of a normal astrologer. But Tommaso Campanella was not a normal astrologer. He was a sorcerer who used astrological magic in his sorcery of summoning spirits. That's a hardcore sorcerer / astrologer. But Tommaso Campanella's Wikipedia page only mentions that he's an astrologer. It doesn't talk about him being a sorcerer. But this book details a ceremony in which Pope Urban VIII was cursed by someone, and they believed in curses back then. And Pope Urban VIII, no different than a king, required the help of a sorcerer to help him out. So the Pope, a supposed godly man, is asking the help of a sorcerer, even though it says in the Bible explicitly that you're not supposed to engage in sorcery. It says in the Bible you're not even supposed to converse with a sorcerer, let alone ask him to do a ceremony for you. So this book talks about, on page 15, how Pope Urban VIII asked Tommaso Campanella the sorcerer to conduct a ceremony to get rid of the curse that was placed upon him. And supposedly the curse was taken away, and that the ceremony supposedly worked, because Pope Urban did not die until 1644. Apparently the curse predicted he would die before then. And the ceremony is interesting. Well, the ceremony basically described Tommaso Campanella having a room totally dedicated to a ceremony. The colors aligning with the astrological spirits, incense, you name it. Everything, the curtains, everything all set up for an astrological summoning of astrological spirits, which there's a good chance are demons. So the Pope asked a sorcerer to summon demons to help him get rid of a curse. That's pretty crazy, but this supposedly happened. And I found that interesting, very surprising. It's something that a medieval Pope took part in. Very against the Catholic beliefs, but there are a lot of ancient popes that did go against Catholic beliefs. It's not something we see today so blatantly, but let's move on. So let's skip on over to page 76. I found another red flag on page 76. Page 76 simply talks about a way to get rid of ghosts haunting your house. You're supposed to throw some beans over your shoulder, and the ghosts will be distracted by the beans. I don't understand how that would get rid of a ghost. So perhaps that's obviously a totally false story. You can't get rid of ghosts by throwing beans over your shoulder. But this is more of just an ancient belief, a medieval belief. But on page 229, a pretty hilarious story is described as being a fact. At one moment, weltering in the graveyard procedures of necromancy. At the next, he is slyly turning people into animals. And then it says, Aleister Crowley could do this, and once turned the poet Victor Newburgh into a camel. Excuse me? Aleister Crowley turned someone into a camel. Okay, he states it as if it's a fact. If I was going to be objective and I wrote about that, I would have said, Aleister Crowley claimed he turned someone into a camel. Now, that is obviously a story based on the old wise tale that witches can turn people into a pig or into a bird or into an animal. And there's no proof that it's a fact. So to state it as a fact, I have to mark it off. I have to put that in the category of totally false. So these falsehoods of Crowley was a reincarnation of Eliphas Levi. Crowley could turn people into camels. Trust me, there are other lies about Crowley in this book, which the author just blatantly says is a fact, without even attempting to back it up, without even putting citing any references. It's pretty obvious that this author, Richard Cavendish, practically is a Thelemite, someone that worships Aleister Crowley, someone that just believes apparently he's read every Crowley book and believes every word of what Crowley claims to have done. I'm not a fan of Crowley, I'll say that up front, and so I'm very skeptical of anything he's ever claimed to have done. There's a lot of occultists that worship Aleister Crowley, or I guess worship is a strong word. They kind of idolize him. And this book is a good example of how the modern occultists think. They see Crowley as like a total hero for some weird reason. The reason musicians like Crowley, I believe, is because Crowley wrote, you could be a successful poet and a successful musician if you take a lot of strange drugs and you get in a trance-like state and you follow blah, blah, blah. And a lot of musicians have obviously been successful taking drugs, getting in a trance, and getting ideas for music. I think that's going down the dark path. I personally would want to rely on inspiration through other means rather than relying on drugs and trances. But that's just me. Page 260. Let's see what false information is on page 260. Yeah, here's a piece of concrete false information, which is not objective. Here's a piece of concrete false information from this author, which is completely unverifiable. On page 260, the author claims that the Testament of Solomon, which he's talking about the Lesser Key of Solomon, dates from AD 100 to 400, which is totally false. This book, which I believe is an ancient medieval hoax, does not date to 100 AD. Not even close. I've done some research on the Lesser Key of Solomon. It dates around 1500 AD. As early as 1400 AD. Maybe as early as 1300 AD. It's a medieval hoax, a medieval script. I believe it's around 1500, 1600 AD. Not even close to 100 AD. Not even close. And so this author didn't do his research, but he didn't have Wikipedia back then. And I understand Wikipedia can be false, but I've read other sources which verify, historically speaking, the experts agree, the Lesser Key of Solomon surfaced in medieval times. No one practiced or believed or knew about it pre-medieval times. And I personally believe it's a hoax. If there is any truth to it, it could have been a Jewish urban myth. Just ancient scroll in Hebrew, translated into English in the medieval times. But I don't even give it that much credit. I think it's a medieval hoax. It talks about King Solomon having a ring where he can control demons, and he commanded demons to build the temple. And demons building a temple, that's not ever described anywhere in the Bible. Lesser Key of Solomon is not AD 100. It's never been proven to be AD 100. So I have to mark off this book for that piece of false information. But there are some interesting pieces of information in this book. On page 85, it talks about something that E.A. Coetting believes in, becoming a living God. Now, I don't believe in that. I don't believe you can become a living God. I think that's totally bogus. And I'm not going to mark this off. This is just a piece of information that I thought was interesting. Page 85, it talks about how the process of Kabbalah is a search for God, but it can also be an attempt to wield the magical power which belongs to man as the potential God. And it goes on to say how in the Kabbalah they believe you could be a living God. And it spells Kabbalah with a C, but Kabbalah with a K is the same thing. And I don't want to offend any Kabbalists, but Kabbalah is related to the Lesser Key of Solomon, that medieval hoax. And, okay, calling it a hoax is just someone's opinion, but it's a lot of historians' opinion, a lot of expert historians' opinion. It was supposedly the Kabbalah scripts talk about the 72 demons and angels, yada yada yada, the tree of life. Kabbalists, let's say Kabbalists in Hollywood, they believe when they're summoning a spirit, they're summoning their psyche. And then when they're communicating with a spirit, they're communicating with their psyche. What they believe in basically is you can have supernatural therapy sessions with yourself, with your higher self. And so it comes off a little bit schizophrenic, but that's just how I see it. But I don't believe that they're communicating with their psyche. I don't believe they're communicating with their subconscious. I believe they're communicating with fifth dimensional beings pretending to be your subconscious. Fifth dimensional beings that'll say and do anything to get you to think that they're not real, to get you to think they don't exist. Because if they don't exist, you can trust them. If they don't exist, and if they are what they say they are, part of your psyche, then you can fully trust them and do whatever they say. But if they do exist and they're independent intelligences, then it's supernatural, interdimensional communication going on. And if they're telling you to do negative, evil things, that's a red flag. Maybe don't do it. I've never been in a situation like that, but if an entity claiming to be your subconscious asks you to, hey, give me some blood, put some blood on the altar, put some blood on this little sigil here, put some blood here, blood here, blood here, blood there, I would say, I don't think so. Not going to happen. 0 blood, 0 incense, 0 anything. Incense, it's a tiny thing, but even giving incense to one of these entities is technically idolatry. And there are people like E.A. Koetting that will claim everything's idolatry, but everything is not idolatry. Idolatry is pretty set in stone. So there is some other interesting stuff in this book. Page 125 talks about the secret of secrets. Some occultists have claimed to know its true pronunciation, but this is a secret of secrets, a great arcanum of the mysteries, revealed to none but the elite. So what is the secret of secrets? The correct pronunciation of the name of God. This is something Kabbalists believe in, occultists believe in. It is mentioned in a lot of Hebrew texts, and they weren't allowed to pronounce God's name, so they took out all the vowels when they were writing it down. And because of that, the correct pronunciation was only whispered among the high rabbis that were allowed to whisper it. But it was whispered so quietly that no one heard it, except for perhaps the head guy. And because of that, it has never been passed down. We lost the pronunciation that the Jews used for the true pronunciation of the name of God. All we have is it written out without the vowels. We can only guess. I've seen a few websites guessing, and no one has been able to, historians have not been able to agree on the pronunciation because there are too many letters missing. We do not know. But this book talks about, on page 124, page 125, it talks about how all of these names of God are really just titles. And the title gets down to God or gods. A title is technically not a name. So the true secret name of God, no one knows. And it speculates, and I've heard this in other texts, that the name of the devil is the name of God backwards. Who knows if that's true or not, but it sounds like something someone made up. There's an interesting mention on page 144 of alchemy, lead to gold. It claims, which I find interesting, it claims someone turned lead into gold. Obviously, no one turned lead into gold. There's no evidence. Well, let's just put it this way. There's a lot of mythology about it, but there's no verifiable proof. It would be interesting if someone left the evidence in a museum. Oh, I'm going to turn this lead brick into gold. Here you have a 40-pound lead brick. There you go. I'll just leave it there. Now, that would be a little different, but there's never any gold left behind. I guess they spent it. On page 144, they talk about lead to gold, and they talk about it as if it's a fact. And the search for the Philosopher's Stone, and the Philosopher's Stone supposedly can turn anything into gold or turn anything into the elixir of eternal life. It did mention a king in this book who was told the Philosopher's Stone is water. So he drank so much water that he killed himself drinking too much water. And he had his body cremated and put in some special container so he could live forever. Now, you're not going to live forever if you die by drinking too much water and put in a special container. That's not how it works. You're kind of looking for eternal life in the wrong places. But that's my personal opinion. Magic words. On page 130, they talk about magic words like abracadabra, for example. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen this abracadabra triangle. It's nothing new. It describes how they believed that if you had a word that weaned off at the end and disappeared, that he would get rid of an illness. If you had this on a piece of paper around your neck or something like that. Perhaps there are magic words. I do not know, but abracadabra seems to be one of the more famous ones. And they do mention some Jewish charm. Abracal, abracala, abraca, abra, and they think maybe that was the origin for abracadabra. They're pretty similar, so it's possible. Let's just end on page 80. This book has a lot of chapters. It has a necromancy chapter, it has a worship the devil chapter, has an origin of Satan chapter, but there are a lot of biased chapters from the perspective of this occultist. Take everything in this book with a grain of salt, is what I learned. But I'll end on page 80. On page 80, I thought it was pretty hilarious that it claims a guy has no belly button. And that's pretty hilarious. The members of the Wisdom, Knowledge, Faith, Love, Fountain of the World cult in California chant 22 times at their daily morning services, love one, love ye one another, love all, serve ye one another. The Fountain of the World is a sect of followers of the late Krishna Venta, who is believed to be Christ because he had no navel, meaning that he was not born of a woman and was killed with a bomb several years ago by dissident followers of his love one, love all philosophy. So it kind of states that this guy doesn't have a belly button, therefore he must be divine. And that's totally bogus. I would like to have seen a photograph of his belly button, though. If I can find a photograph of this guy, Krishna Venta, having no belly button, I'll put it here so we can look and see what this guy with no belly button looked like. But I seriously doubt that. I would say this is a totally bogus story. Everyone has a belly button. And if by some bizarre, strange turn of events that someone does not have a belly button, I would believe it's probably just simply the cord was cut so precisely that they don't have an innie or an outie, but that it just kind of evened off and healed. Perhaps that's what happened, but there's no such thing as someone that does not have a belly button. Even Jesus, who was born of Mary, had a belly button, I believe. I'd say everyone has a belly button. And if you can prove me wrong, feel free to do so. But this book, The Black Arts by Richard Cavendish, there are some interesting things here and there. There's a numerology chapter, which is interesting. It talks about Hebrew numerology and more modern numerology. Don't believe in it, but it's sort of interesting. So I give this book, The Black Arts by Richard Cavendish, 2.5 skulls out of 5. Because it has so many opinions stated as a fact that I had to mark it down. I wish I could have given it 4 skulls or even 5 skulls. But I do not recommend this book to people that believe everything they read. If you have a mind that you verify things independently, then and read things with a grain of salt, then this book is a decent perspective and insight into the mind of the occultists from 1967, and it relates to the modern occultists. A lot of what they believed in 1967, they still believe today, because I've read and watched a lot of videos, and the same stuff comes up. But it's still interesting, and I'm going to be reading some Vodun books coming up next. I have 2 Vodun books, and I'm going to read them. Haitian Vodun, I believe, Haitian Voodoo. It's an interesting subject. It's not for kids. It's definitely adult-themed stuff. And a lot of these occult books I do not recommend for kids. But what you do not know can hurt you. That's what I personally believe. That, everyone has heard the saying, what you don't know can't hurt you. And that's a totally false saying. That's totally false. What you don't know can hurt you. Let's say there's a killer behind you with a gun or a knife. What you don't know can't hurt you. That guy can hurt you. If you knew he was there, you might be able to save your life and the life of others. It's an exaggerated analogy, but these books talk about things that I would tend to want to avoid. I was drawn to these books because of supernatural experiences that I have had. And once you've personally firsthand witnessed or heard or felt or sensed supernatural experiences, it's hard to dismiss them as total folklore and garbage, because I've experienced firsthand supernatural events. It reminds me of David Bowie, who was asked, "Are you an atheist?" And David Bowie said, "Ask me in 2 months." I think he said, "I wish I could say I was, but I'm not." Now, I could be reading into that too much, but I believe David Bowie has experienced a supernatural event in his life. It's probably the reason he's not an atheist. If you have witnessed a supernatural event, you cannot be an atheist. Atheists do not believe in the supernatural, but they can explain it away as psychological, as part of the psyche, as part of the subconscious. But I've been on this earth long enough to know when something's part of my psyche and subconscious, and when something is an intelligent being that is totally independent from me, perhaps moving objects. I do not have the power to move objects with my mind. I can't use my chi power to move objects, although that is an episode coming soon. I am doing an episode on telekinesis, Mo Pao Ni Kung, the art of moving objects with your mind or with a chi power, and look forward to that in the future. Until then, I thank you for watching. This has been John Razimus with the Occult Unmasked. Be seeing you.